Hey, it's Seabass, and I got you another story. Nowadays, it's pretty widely known that the Chevrolet Corvette has become an American staple for performance, and that its ever-growing cult following of both rotting old boomers
Nice work job, asshole!
Hey, I'll beat the fuck out of you!
and the newer generation of car enthusiasts who want affordable power, have fought tooth and nail to establish just how great of a car the Corvette truly is. Although I won't doubt that the Corvette has made a massive impact on the world of cars from its birth, I will say that in my opinion, although controversial, its most notable and progressive step forward has been the switch over to a mid-engine platform, introduced in July of 2019 as the 8th generation, or C8, Corvette. Although the exploits of the father of the mid-engine Corvette, one Zora Arkus Duntov, which focused on pushing the boundaries of what performance meant for the Corvette, have been documented fairly well at this point, namely the creation of the XP882 and XP895 prototypes, it still isn't widely known that these early concepts and the planning and creation of the C8 aren't the only examples of mid-engine Corvettes that drove under their own power. And on this note, let me show you my favorite Corvette, or at least what could have been my favorite Corvette if GM hadn't killed it for being too different. The CERV 3, or the Corvette Indy, which in reality is an erroneous name given that it actually refers to a 1985 concept, which was what eventually led to the CERV 3. This car is a prime example of how GM has purposely killed an amazing concept that was almost production ready, but it isn't the only one. After I finish with the story of the CERV 3, I'd like to tell you the story of the Pontiac Banshee, and how both of these cars were taken behind the barn in an effort to secure the supremacy of GM's favorite little sports car, the front-engined, rear-wheel drive Chevrolet Corvette. We start development of the CERV 3 all the way back in 1960, with the development of the CERV 1. By this point, our esteemed Zora Arkus Duntov had been with GM since May of 1953. CERV, which initially stood for Chevrolet Engineering Research Vehicle, was the name given to a series of different Chevy test mules created by Duntov to help develop Chevy's bodies, chassis, and suspension systems for use in performance cars. The CERV 1 was an open-wheel racer equipped with a 283 cubic inch V8 that made 350 horsepower while only weighing 350 pounds. The power would be transmitted through a 4-speed transmission from the standard Corvette. The suspension was independent to all 4 wheels via multi-link, and the brakes used a 2-piston master cylinder to avoid complete failure under stress. With a plastic body and a chromoly tube frame coupled to the aluminum 283, the CERV 1 only weighed in at 1,600 pounds. In 1964, the CERV 1 would be refitted with a new small block 377 cubic inch V8, as well as new fuel injection, wheels, tires, and a slimmer body. Also in '64, after many concept cars that followed the standard Corvette model of a front-engine rear-wheel drive car, Zora Arkus Duntov would introduce the CERV 2, which followed the CERV 1's formula but wasn't an open-wheel car, and instead looked more like a 60s Le Mans car. The CERV 2 used the same 377 cubic inch V8 from the original CERV, but with Hillborn fuel injection, which might have made around 500 horsepower, which was transmitted through a variable power delivery system which allowed the car to bust out a 2.5 second 0 to 60 time on one setting, or a 0 to 60 time under 5 seconds but a top speed over 180 mile an hour. Within the same year, the original XP833 Pontiac Banshee concept would debut, but we'll get back to that later. The next couple of decades would bring a whole bunch of different concepts and prototypes, such as the XP819 and the Astro 1, which really stretched what a Corvette could look like, the Astrovette, which is basically the Mach 5, as well as the mid-engine Astro 2, the Astro 3, which was a 3-wheeler, the XP882, which was as close to a mid-engine C3 Corvette as you could fathom, a mid-engine rotary prototype called the XP897 GT, which used a 2-rotor engine.
Holy fuck! Holy fuck! Holy fuck!
A 4-rotor version of the XP882 with an updated body, an aluminum-bodied mid-engine V8 car called the XP895, a GTP car mounted with a 1,000 horsepower V6 that was based on a Lola T600 and won 7 pole positions in the '86 IMSA Camel GT series as well as 2 overall wins, and finally, the original '85 Corvette Indy, which debuted as a possible replacement for the Corvette, which would now get a 5th generation.
Yes!
About the Corvette Indy, Although it never strictly ran at first, it would later get 2 working prototypes which were mounted with Chevy's 2.6-liter 32-valve twin-turbocharged V8s, which were designed by Lotus, as well as 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steering, active suspension, ABS, electronic traction control, electronic throttle control, a dash-mounted screen, and a 3-speed auto transmission mated to a 2-speed gearbox, essentially creating 6 gears, which I suppose works similarly to how semi-trucks use 2 gear sets split between low and high. All this tech generated right around 600 horsepower, and the Corvette Indy concept went on to be the direct ancestor to the CERV 3, but we would have to wait until 1990 for it to be created. It's now 1990, and we are finally blessed by the culmination of decades worth of experimentation and technological advancement, the pinnacle of what a mid-engine Corvette could be for the time, and a genuine possible replacement for the last official generation of the Corvette, the CERV 3. Armed with a carbon fiber Nomex and Kevlar constructed body that was reinforced via aluminum honeycomb and a Lotus-made 5.7-liter twin-turbo V8 strengthened with better connecting rods and pistons from Mali, the CERV 3 breathed out a whopping 650 horsepower. Keep in mind, this is 1990. The body cut through air so well that its drag coefficient came out to only 0.277. With all this power and such light weight, the calculated top speed for the CERV 3 would come out to 225 miles per hour. Obviously though, if you plan to go over 200 miles an hour, you gotta be able to stop, and so instead of a traditional disc brake setup, each wheel used a dual disc system, where the calipers sat atop 2 side-by-side discs, essentially doubling the stopping power of traditional brakes at each wheel. The 2 transmission setup from the Indy remained, and it was fully automatic. The 4-wheel drive also remained with a viscous coupling system managing power between the front and rear wheels, which is a feature also included on the technologically groundbreaking Porsche 959. The CERV 3 was a handler, it was powerful, it was genius, and it was beautiful, but it would never last. Obviously, GM knew that such a radical redesign of such an iconic car might not have been a guaranteed hit with the already established Corvette crowd, and so, right when it was complete, running, driving, and it was a show-stopping real vehicle, they ended its life. Just like that. Now obviously, given another few decades, the true potential of the mid-engine Corvette that Zora Arkus Duntov had dreamt of would in fact be realized, but I'd argue that it was just the natural progression of what the Corvette had to become nowadays. Whereas, if the CERV 3 had been the first successful mid-engine Corvette prototype to come to market, it would have probably been a groundbreaking moment for the entire American car industry, similar to what Ford did with the 2002 GT40 concept. I guess you could say that the CERV 3 kind of lived on though, if only in spirit, because some noticeable design features from the CERV's appearance made it into other cars, like the C5 Corvette, which shares a vaguely similar front-end design, as well as the 4th generation Camaro and Firebird, which shared their extremely sloped front and rear windshield as well as their rear wing with the CERV 3. Trying not to shed a tear for the CERV 3, and closing the book on its life, we return back to the year 1964, where a little after the completion of CERV 2 came the first time that the public would be graced by a Banshee. Strangely enough though, the only reason that we know the XP833 as the Banshee is as a result of an earlier project called the XP798, which was originally given the name Scorpion, coming from another concept of Pontiac's, but then renamed by the head of Pontiac at the time, the John DeLorean, to Banshee in relation to a fighter plane. The XP798, although conceived a little earlier than the XP833, would only be complete afterward, and would eventually be crushed, with its only remaining artifact being the badges that they slapped onto the 833. The newly named Banshee would have 2 different drivable prototypes, with one bearing an inline 6 and a silver hardtop roof, and the other being a white convertible with a V8. The XP833 would be based on the GMA body, and both cars were equipped with fiberglass bodies that made the car with the 6-cylinder only weigh 2,200 pounds. For the time, this was another genuinely brilliant car, and John DeLorean would refer to this car as the Mustang Fighter. For a good chunk cheaper than the equivalent base model Corvette, you would have been able to get the same horsepower, 500 pounds less weight, and more features. GM immediately looked at this car and said no, because they knew that it was a better deal than their little Vette, and they were afraid that the Banshee would bite into the Corvette sales, or maybe even surpass them. By this point, it had already been a while since GM had established that the Corvette was their top banana in terms of performance, and so feeling that they should keep it that way, the Banshee was cancelled, and they told DeLorean to stop working on it. The thing is, even though they knew the Corvette couldn't be surpassed, higher-ups at GM also saw how promising this car was. So, following its termination, GM told DeLorean to rework the body and interior to look more like a Chevy. This is literally what led to the creation of the C3 Corvette. It looks a little obvious though, once you put them side by side, with both sharing some distinct body lines and construction. The Banshee would make such waves in its short life that other features, like its taillights, would make it into that year's Firebird. Aside from the direct repurposing of the XP833 to make the Corvette, there would never again be an instance where a Banshee was technically or otherwise produced. There were, however, several other Banshee concepts, such as the Banshee 2 in 1968, which essentially used the inner skin of a 67 Firebird but a fiberglass exterior with different wheels, a deep louvered hood, a really short windshield, lower ride height, ducts to cool the brakes, and the Pontiac 400 V8, as well as the 74 Banshee 3, which was essentially just that year's Firebird Trans Am but with a much smoother, more aerodynamic body and a 455 Super Duty V8. The most notable Banshee to come after the original, though, would have to be the 88 Banshee 4 concept, which made it into Back to the Future 2, Demolition Man, a 1989 issue of Motor Trend, and would also be produced as a Hot Wheels car. The Banshee 4 was meant to be GM's vision of the future, with a super sleek body, a heads-up display, a rear-view camera, and weird seats that look strange and odd.
Yes, it is dramatic.
Sadly enough though, and quite obviously, this car didn't even make it into the future, but its design language would influence the next Firebird, just like the original Banshee did with the earlier Firebird, as well as a good portion of the 4th gen Camaro, which it shared its influence on with the CERV 3. Similarly to the CERV cars, the Banshee concept's legacies would be passed down through a myriad of other General Motors cars, both projects being some of the most brilliant work for their time in General Motors, with advancements in weight reduction and reinforcement as well as power and handling. The CERV 3 was the climax of decades worth of research and proving, and the Banshee was the product of pure ingenuity and love of the game, and although we should be thankful that we have a mid-engine Corvette at all, I still think that these cars are some of the saddest cases of wasted potential. These two cars were projects that were defining chapters in the path that would lead to the names of their creators being cemented in the history books of the automotive industry, with Zora Arkus-Duntov going on to be inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame, the SEMA Hall of Fame, and having an exhibition dedicated to him at the Alexander Solzhenitsyn Center for Russian Emigres in Moscow, while John DeLorean would go on to become the head of the Chevrolet division at GM, create his iconic DeLorean sports car, get an indictment for trafficking coke, die, and then have a museum dedicated to him in Humble, Texas. After getting to know the stories of these cars, I feel robbed, but at least I can say, thank you for watching. I'll see you around.